973 ESPN.com, the 973 ESPN mobile app, where you can find Jason Blevins' latest piece about Mike Scott. Interesting insights about Mike Scott. Better check it out for tonight's game, 7:30. The action starts right here on 97.3 ESPN. Tom McGinnis on the call, and Jason Blevins will be in the house tonight covering the Sixers' first game back in the house. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing good. So it feels almost surreal that the NBA season is getting started back up. We're finally getting basketball again. It's a little later than usual, but there's a lot of expectation and juice, I feel like, for this Sixers team because you got a new head coach, you got a new cast of characters around Ben and Joel. What is maybe like a storyline or something going on with this team that has stood out to you the most over the last few weeks?
Well, I think that the mantra since Ben Simmons has been drafted has been surround him with shooters. And I really think Daryl Morey has done that. So I think you're going to see an array of guys that can space the floor, and a lot of positive comments about those guys, unprompted during our Zoom calls. You know, guys like Dwight Howard, vets, Danny Green, start bringing up names like Shake Milton, like Furkan Korkmaz, and then you have Seth Curry, you have Danny Green. You're going to have the ability to have one or two really dangerous weapons from beyond the arc on the floor at all times. And I think that's the biggest change from what we saw from this team in the bubble.
When you look at what's been happening with James Harden in Houston, I just want to get your thoughts. I know that there's been some rumored around maybe 3 first-rounders and Ben Simmons, which is clearly too high. But do you get a sense, because it's the sense that I get, but do you get a sense that they want to see what they have in Ben and Joel before they make any sort of moves? Doc Rivers came here before Daryl Morey, and he came here knowing that he would have these 2 stars. So is Daryl Morey kind of feeling like, hey, Doc was here, he wanted to run at this thing before I maybe go out on a crazy trade?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think, James Harden has a lot more leverage in this situation than I think people think. I think a lot of people go on a trade machine or they go on NBA 2K and they start to do these trades and they think about fair value. But in reality, when a star wants to leave, there's so many different pressure points they can put on an organization that the Sixers really have no reason to overpay or hurry at this point. Now, does Brooklyn swoop in? Maybe. Does another team come out of nowhere? Like Miami? Maybe. But I think the Sixers really want to take a couple of months and with new weapons surrounding the 2 stars and what seems to be some improved acknowledgement between the 2 stars that they really need to build chemistry between themselves. I think they want to give new coaches, new voices a chance to make those guys work. Because if they can work together at a championship level, then you're not sacrificing a ton of assets to get to the same place. You're also not shortening your window, which, quite frankly, you would be if you moved Ben Simmons for James Harden. So, I think that they definitely want to take a couple of months, unless something falls in their lap where it's a no-brainer, which would include Tobias Harris. I think they're happy to wait.
I'm glad you mentioned the whole, people want to use the trade machine. Oh, on 2K, I made blah, blah, blah trade, because I feel like so many times there's a lack of patience when it comes to the development of evolution. People act like these guys are just machines, they're robots, and these are human beings who, they're not matured fully as human beings or basketball players. And I think that on some level, yes, we can be critical of Ben and Joel and Tobias, but there's also to be said with the fact that you got to give these guys an opportunity to evolve and grow into who they're going to be before you make a blanket assumption about who they are.
Yeah, that's right. I think we forget that Ben Simmons is essentially the same age as Matisse Thybulle, and we think about him because he's been in the league for 4 years as as a finished product. And there's a lot of things that he could do with even without the obvious shooting to really take his game to the next level. And at 23, 24 years old, there's just a ton of room for improvement.
When you look at tonight, Sixers, Celtics, and of course it's only preseason, what are you looking for the most? Like when you look at this team play tonight, what are you specifically looking at?
Well, what concerns me, quite frankly, I think it's going to be an interesting atmosphere. You guys started at the top saying it was surreal. I think it is going to be surreal for us, having really pivoted to Zoom calls since March, and then going through the bubble experience where there was no fans and hardly any media. We're going to be in an arena that is built for 20,000 people, and yet there's going to be, let's say there's 100 people there tonight, right? And there's going to be staff, team members, some operations staff, and a handful of media in a really big room versus a ballroom in Disney. So I think the space itself and the lack of energy is what I'm going to look at. The players themselves are going to have to manufacture that competitive spirit and that energy. And a guy like Joel Embiid, who feeds off of the crowd so much, I want to see, does he have that internal energy that he brings to the game without them? He did it pretty well in the bubble. He was fantastically productive. But I do think it's going to be an interesting vibe. I'm really fascinated to see it.
Jason Blevins joining us here on the Boardwalk on the hotline. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at JBlevinsNBA right here on 97.3 ESPN, 76ers beat reporter for 97.3 ESPN.com and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Jason, you mentioned the environment. I want to touch on that a little bit more with you because we talked a little bit about it earlier in the show. I was watching some of Rachel Nichols' Instagram stories over the weekend, and she was talking about where she was set up at the Lakers game, how she felt like, they have a little more space in the arena because there's nobody there, and they're not as insulated because of the all the glass and all the masks and everything. But she mentioned the fact there's still a distinct separation for the media from the players. And how do you feel about the environment this is going to be like? Because in the past, you get the press conferences, people can go in the locker room. There's a shield for traditional access because of all these protocols. So how do you feel like that is going to be for someone like yourself who has covered this team so intensely and intimately over the last few years, and now there is almost like this invisible barrier going on?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I will say that normally our media section is behind the basket, which is close, but is not the best for analyzing the game in the moment. Our seats, they're setting up tables really sort of mid-court at the perfect vantage point for watching the game unfold. So I think there's going to be a positive there. But to your point about the barriers, we're still going to be 50 feet away. There is no locker room. There's no off-the-record stuff. There is all of the little things that we rely on the beat to give us indications of who's probably up and coming, worth getting minutes. We don't have that. I was just talking to someone an hour ago about Jonah Bolden, who I don't think has gotten an offer with any other NBA teams. I'm not sure where Jonah is. And a couple of the other blue coats from last year have landed in Europe. And I said about Jonah, everyone knows I was not very high on Jonah. And the big reason was I was able to see Jonah off the floor, off camera, in practice situations. And, while he flashed at certain times in games, preseason, summer league, all of the off-the-court stuff didn't give you that sort of indication that he was really rising. Whereas Shake Milton, for example, 2 years ago, I was very excited about Shake Milton as a rookie because of the maturity, because of the way he carried himself, the demeanor, his fluidity, and all of those things no one else would see because he wasn't getting any playing time in Philadelphia. It was in Delaware. It was in the locker room. It was in practice, So those are the things that we don't get right now. So if you wanted the same level of insight into a Tyrese Maxey or an Isaiah Joe, right now I can't give you that I would have been able to give you about Landry Shamet two seasons ago, for example, or even Matisse Thybulle this time last year.
That's a great point. That is something that these beat reporters are definitely missing out on as a whole, and it's very unfortunate. Hopefully one day it does get back to that. When looking at the court and what's going to be on the court, is there a projected starting five that you have? Is it as simple as Ben, Tobias, and Embiid, and the other two being Seth Curry and Danny Green? Or do you think it's going to be more of a revolving door, Shake Milton, Matisse Thybulle, depending on matchups?
I think tonight, you nailed what it'll be. Let's say a week ago or so, I would have hesitated about Danny Green because he couldn't join the team until December 8th because of the contractual stuff with that trade. But it sure seems like Doc's going to throw out his vets out there. They've had enough time to work with each other to gain some comfort. And what we're hearing about the 5-on-5s, Shake Milton, instead of being a starter, which I may have thought 10 days ago, he's doing a lot of the backup point guard duties running the second team. So I think he'll start some games. I think he will come off the bench as the sixth man. I think he will certainly run the offense when Ben Simmons is on the bench. He's the one that I think will vacillate between the starting lineup and the bench. And you could see maybe Seth Curry, be the sixth man when Shake starts. That might be a matchup thing. Shake's a much larger player. He's 6'5" with a 7-foot wingspan. Seth is a much smaller player. So, for tonight, I think he probably throws his vets out there just to start on a good note.
Remember Jason Blevins on Twitter at JBlevinsNBA, Sixers beat reporter for 97.3 ESPN.com. Check out his latest article on Mike Scott. Speaking of Mike Scott, I want to ask you, how do you think Doc is going to use the bench? Because we saw him when he was with the Clippers, with Boston, and then before that in Orlando. He's a guy who's not afraid to use his bench. And I think that for some people that might make them scratch some heads because people criticized Brett Brown, for example, for maybe using his bench too much, whereas Doc is a guy who has always been unafraid to go deep in the rotation.
Yeah, I think Brett very much coached to the spreadsheet. And what I mean is he got a lot of analytics from certain folks within the organization who said, these are your best lineups, these are your best staggered minutes rotations, and he followed that pretty closely. If you were to track the minutes, you could predict within the first 3 weeks, you could pretty much predict, when Joel would come off the floor, when Ben would come off the floor, who was coming in those spots. It was pretty rigorous. I think my sense with Doc is he coaches much more around feel for the players. So what he's got is a deep bench of utility players. Some guys can really shoot, and of that group of shooters, he may ride the hot hand one night. So you might see a guy that comes in, makes his first couple of shots, and gets more playing time as a result that night. Versus another night, they might come out, the body language isn't right. Like Mike Scott, you mentioned, the body language was virtually never right last season for him. He never looked comfortable on the floor. I think Doc would get him out. I think Doc is spending a lot of time trying to make people comfortable in their role. And it seems like so far Mike is more comfortable than he was last year. I think it's going to be a feel thing when it comes to those bench guys.
How efficient do you believe a pick and roll game between Ben and Joel Embiid can be? Is that the difference in this team taking the next step?
Honestly, I don't know. If you really just think about it, Joel's not a great screen setter. He has a huge presence. He's also not super quick as a roll man. So I think I think it can work. I wouldn't make it the staple of an offense. Any defense is going to try to cover those guys with two big guys and switch on or go under the screen. So it just, because Ben can't really space the floor, it just doesn't put a lot of pressure, I think, on a defense when you run the two of them in a pick and roll. So to me, they may run it a few times to keep people honest, but I certainly don't expect it to be a staple of the offense.
He's Jason Blevins. Make sure you follow him on Twitter for all your Sixers and NBA coverage. Jay Blevins, NBA. Check out his work over at 97.3 ESPN.com. He will be in the house tonight for Sixers' first game back in the Wells Fargo Center. Preseason action. Coverage begins at 7:30 tonight on 97.3 ESPN. Jason, always appreciate the time and have fun tonight.
Hey, thanks, guys. Have a good one.